Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome one and all to the Defiant Takes Football Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at @TheMaxDean, and we are here live from Mobile, Nick Merriam and myself, and joining us from Cincinnati, we have Max Chadwick of PFF. Whew. All right, so we made it. We're here. It's been a day. Nick's a little sunburned. I'm
a lot sunburned.
A lot sunburned. You're all right. I saw Justin Penick today on Twitter too. He's toasty. Everybody's a little bit red from today. I don't think anybody really expected it, but I been caught up with dad stuff. So it's been an interesting first day down here, to say the least. Max, thanks for joining us, man. How are you?
I'm doing great, guys. I mean, you guys are getting sunburned. I am in the bitter cold of Cincinnati right now. It's like 10 degrees today. So I'm very, I am Irish, so my skin burns quite easily, but I am a little jealous of you guys right now. Obviously, with the Senior Bowl going on, too, must be an awesome time there. So, yeah, I'm glad you guys made it down there, and I'm eager to see what you guys thought about today.
Well, so, I mean, it's for some backstory. Nick and I both drove from opposite ends. I drove from Austin, where now there's like awful weather. So we just escaped that. And Nick drove all the way down from Pennsylvania, or from Philly specifically. So we both arrived basically pretty beat up. And on the way, my younger son basically came down with the cold that my older son had, but he has it way worse. So that turned into like a 13-hour drive from Austin. And so I haven't had any sleep, about 40 minutes of sleep in the past day. And I've been home more than actually at practice today. So I'm a little bit more of a bystander for today than Nick. Nick got to spend the whole day there, which is why he's rosy red. But it's been a day, man. So Nick and I are drinking a little bit of bourbon here to celebrate, getting down and recording the same property. We're in separate rooms for, audio video purposes. But Nick, man, I was there for about 40 minutes after practice actually started. I caught a little bit, but what were your major takeaways from today?
So I really focused on the trenches today. Heard some things from Max's bunch over PFF. Had a little discussion about the early day receivers, corners. Didn't really look too much at the day or late day guys, but I heard some things. And I will say, in the first practice, the player that stood out the most to me really the whole day, just because of my expectations versus what I saw, was Carl Brooks, Bowling Green's edge/interior player. Kyron and I were watching with JP Acosta, really talking about, what we were seeing from these players. And I mean, Brooks is a 300-pound edge rusher, that's just in itself, like, the one guy that comes to mind in the NFL who did that and was good. Not that I'm comparing Carl Brooks to that guy, is Reggie White. Like, everyone's going to have Carl Brooks playing on the interior because of that. And he may very well be an interior player, but he has the upfield twitch and speed to win from the edge, that he's not going to be just an interior player, even if that's his main position at the NFL level. And he was like one of the only guys who was giving DeJuan Jones any problems ever. No one really had the ability to move past Jones. He was excellent with his movement skills all day. And, that 6'8", 360-pound frame just, buys you some extra space just a bit to win with that. But Brooks was winning consistently. It looked like he belonged. Looked like one of the better players defensively there. And he's a guy that I really liked coming into today. I believe PFF had him 65th on their board. I probably would have been around that range. I think he's a good player. It's locked in day 2 guy, and he might be moving up even more because the production was there this year. The flashes were there. He certainly has the size and measurables, and I think his athleticism, the way he carries that 300 pounds, he is like a slim 300. It's pretty frightening. I was very impressed by how he played. And then on the other end, DeJuan Jones is just a freak. Darnell Wright, the second practice, was just going after guys. I think Jones was constantly grabbing dudes and tossing to the ground. Like that's his style of play, but Wright was just kind of shoving them to the ground. Like he is just an aggressive pass protector, gets first contact consistently. I heard more than once someone say Darnell Wright made more money than anybody else at this practice today. So he certainly played well. Good day for big physical tackles for sure. Cody Mock playing guard. It looked like he belonged at that position. His short sets and pass pro were great. And obviously run blocking looked as good as it did early in the year when he was playing tackle. Keanu Benton, nose tackle, Wisconsin, really showed out early on too. He was winning a lot with his power. But there was a nice mix early on of, especially in the first practice, of a lot of these kind of hybrid defensive line types. You had Ade Adewale from Northwestern, who's like 280 pounds. You have really Isaiah Foskey is like bigger than we thought and was kind of playing up and down the line a little bit too. Andre Carter, they're still really figuring out what he is. I think that's like the one guy to me that wasn't as big as what we expected. Came in weighted at 252. Just like looked slim, clearly has not developed his body, which, West Point, they don't really do that stuff. So it's just, it's going to be a little bit of a curve for him learning to be an NFL athlete. And he certainly has the skill set. You see his arms, he doesn't know how to use them, but when he gets good leverage, it's just hard to beat him. There's a lot of talent, I think, in the trenches at the Senior Bowl, and we saw it up and down, but early on, Darnell Wright, Dillon Jones, Carl Brooks are the three guys that really popped to me today.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about all three of those guys. I mean, those are three guys that PFF loved coming into the Senior Bowl. Like Carl Brooks is our highest graded edge defender in the country. He's a 93 grade. The second most pressures this year behind Washington's Braylon Trice is going back to school as well. He's probably going to play in the interior the next level because, like Nick said, you just don't see 300-pound edge defenders very often unless they're, all-time greats like Reggie White. But he's a guy that I think could succeed on the interior at the next level. Or if he cuts some weight, he could play a little bit on the edge too. Like I'm a big fan of Carl Brooks' game. DeJuan Jones, 6'8", 360. I believe he broke the wingspan record at the Senior Bowl, like a 7'6" wingspan, I think it was, which is absolutely absurd. And not only that, like you would think, he would just kill guys in the run game. And yes, he does do that. He also allowed the lowest pressure rate in the country this year for offensive tackles. So he's got really, really good technique. Obviously, at that size, foot speed will be an issue. And he did, struggle a little bit in terms of recovery at Ohio State this year. But like Nick said, he dominated the Senior Bowl today. And he's a guy that I think is a guaranteed top 50 pick now. And then Darnell Wright, the last one you mentioned there, he's a guy actually who in 2019 was a top 10 recruit coming out. And he, quite frankly, stunk for 3 years. He was really bad for Tennessee in his first 3 years. This year, he turned it on, man, and looked really good as a pass protector. They switched him from right tackle over to left tackle. Really good year, and he finally showed why he was such a highly touted recruit coming out of high school. And yeah, like Nick said, he probably made himself a lot of money today. He's another guy I could see going, in the second or third round of this draft.
So DeJuan Jones is a guy that hasn't necessarily been like consistently mocked in the first round, I would say, up to this point. But it feels like the way that we're talking about him today, that people are starting to move in that direction. Because we talk about traits with athletic position like tackle all the time. Is that something that's gonna push him up there now that people are in the draft community are getting their eyes on him physically more today, the rest of this week, and potentially in the combine?
I think Wright and Jones are both going to have some late first round buzz eventually here. I don't know if it, like when they test, I think both guys are going to test out of this world, and that's going to solidify it. I would not be shocked. I like Anton Harrison. I think Broderick Jones is a good player, but there are going to be teams that look at, what Wright can be, what Jones can be, especially, if you want to make their right tackles, right? That's a position that generally is more the point attack of the run game. Like just having those physical freaks, you could very well, if you hit on that pick, you have the downside of like they're a little raw and maybe it just doesn't work at all. But if they work, like they could both be top right tackles in the NFL. There's a high ceiling picks there. And just at the rate we've seen these type of players kind of quite frankly, hit and produce early at the NFL level recently, like you might feel really good about it, even taking those guys in the first round. I mean, we'll see how we haven't really spoken to many people about like where we think, but it seemed like everyone was kind of seeing the same thing today with those two, and they were in a league of their own. And I want to shout out Matt Bergeron had a really good day today too. He was more on the conservative side of just like doing his job and looking good, but he's another guy that I also think is like round 2 is very likely for him. I think the tape is good. He's best games came against better teams. He's rounded into form, veteran college player at this point, 4 years, played right and left side, and just he was going up against a lot of SEC edge players in that second practice and was just handling them just fine. That's the guy that I think we Max and I are both Syracuse guys, but I think he's going to be the first Syracuse player selected in this draft.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a terrific pass protector. He's got a great anchor in pass protection too. Run blocking, he gets out over his toes a little bit too much and he gets a little off balance. But like Nick said, pass protection is king in the NFL, and he does a really good job of that. Back to Darnell Wright for 1 second. Obviously, the Senior Bowl is going to be a huge boost to his draft stock. If you kind of want to see what Darnell Wright is and what he can be at the next level and how he improves so much, turn on the Alabama game this year. Against Will Anderson Jr. and Dallas Turner, Darnell Wright allowed one pressure. Will Anderson Jr. is going to be a top 5 pick in this draft, and Dallas Turner is probably going to be a top 15 pick in next year's draft. And Darnell Wright schooled them in that game. And that was a shootout between Alabama and Tennessee. And a lot of that was because Hendon Hooker was given time by Darnell Wright where he could just attack downfield. And yeah, like I said, it's not often that Will Anderson Jr. is almost erased from a game, but that was one of those games where it was like you didn't even notice Will Anderson Jr. was on the field, which is a very difficult thing to do. So watch the Senior Bowl, watch that obviously, but also if you want to see what Darnell Wright can be, watch this Alabama game from this year because he was fantastic in that game.
So what else are you hearing on the back end from your PFF guys, Max? What are you getting from the multitudes?
Nick actually, nailed a lot of the big winners. The one guy that we haven't mentioned yet, and we haven't mentioned any, non-trench guys, and I think the Senior Bowl is a very trench-heavy draft. You look at last year's Senior Bowl, every quarterback was at last year's Senior Bowl. Literally almost every single one of them that was at the top of the quarterback rankings. This year, the quarterbacks are not good. Not good at all this year. Like Max Duggan might be the biggest guy there, and he's a 4th or 5th round guy. And one guy, though, that I love, he's a fantastic player in college, and he murdered it at the Senior Bowl today. And I know Mike and Trevor, when I talked to them, they were very impressed. Tank Dell from Houston was electric in college. He's kind of like the group of 5 Kadarius Toney, I've called him a lot of times, where he is just, you give him the ball, man, he's going to make magic happen. And in the Senior Bowl one-on-ones where you can't really be breaking tackles because it's not really what the drill is, he still showed off great burst, great stop, great acceleration, and also stopping, which is, a really important trait for wide receivers. Tank Dell, his agility is out of this world, and I think he made himself a lot of money. He's probably going to be a 2nd-round pick, and he was one of the best receivers in college football this year. I think he led the nation, actually, in receiving yards, and you think, okay, well, it's against American athletic competition. He showed today at the Senior Bowl that he's a player, man, and he is one of those players that you just want in your offense because he is pure electricity.
Yeah, so that was a second practice, and he was the only guy I really got heard being talked about, and just multiple times, like he's flying. Like that guy's different speed on the field, which is important considering I think his measurements, like he's smaller than me, but he's got the twitchiness that really sets that type of player aside to be an impact player at the NFL level. He's going to be, either a very, very good slot or, at least a difference maker, like a kind of change of pace outside type, which I think he could potentially do that just because of the way he moves. Like it'll work almost anywhere on the field, in my opinion.
And
earlier in the day, earlier in the day, there were a couple guys so I caught up. I actually had never met Trevor or Mike, Max's colleagues, before today, or Mike Quinn, producer of PFF extraordinaire, or Dave Selfaro. So I saw them and I said, hey, what's up? And that franchise guy, Marcus Whitman, was with them too. So I was having a discussion with him as well. And they were all watching the receivers. And I kind of talked about what we saw in the trenches, and they talked about Michael Wilson in the first practice was a guy that came up in terms of the name that they were really blown away by his ability, kind of just out of release, like his quick twitchiness to just kind of, shake a defender and get free and on release. Like something doesn't always show in college, just because depending on what scheme you're running or what defenses you're going up against, you might not get a lot of press coverage, or you might not be asking your receivers to try and win immediately off the ball. You're trying to time the routes up. And he really showed that extremely well. It was a tough day to really see the separation, just because quarterbacks, quite frankly, this was a rough day for quarterback play. It was not very good. A lot of misses.
Started rough.
Not many deep balls connected. Started rough and ended rough. I mean, look, man, I wanted to see something cool from Tyson Bagent, and that guy has an arm, but that's kind of at this point probably it. It's just the accuracy was not there, and he was given opportunities to show it, and I think it wasn't there. Clayton Tune checked out of a play. I heard someone yell about that. That's okay. Cool. You can check out of plays. Jake Haener was probably the best quarterback, and he even had some nerves at times, dropped a couple of under center snaps right in a row. And that's not something that I really worry about, but it was a shaky day from the quarterback play. But, guys like Wilson who could shake early and get open, off the ball are the guys who will stand out in that case. And he was one of them. And he was certainly highlighted by Max's colleagues.
Yeah, and it's funny because, you mentioned Michael Wilson, and it's okay, he plays on a Stanford team that went 3-9 this past year. So you're okay, he must have been a superstar. He's destroying the Senior Bowl. This guy was the fourth leading receiver on Stanford this past year. I'm actually amazed that Jim Nagy had in the scouting department. I mean, kudos to them, man, because for them to actually notice this guy and be hey, he may not have produced and he may play for a god-awful team, he's still got something. And the fact that they got Stanford's number 4 receiver this year, and he's lighting it up against some of the best players in America, that says a lot. I think both for him, obviously, he's going to make that made him a lot of money, because I'm telling you right now, he probably was not going to be drafted at all going in. And now that Senior Bowl, this is a Senior Bowl where some guys under the radar like Michael Wilson can make a lot of money. But also, I just want to give a shout out to Jim Nagy and the scouting department for even extending that guy an invite, because when you look at the number 4 receiver for Stanford this year, that's a bad Stanford team. That's not a guy I probably would have invited in. The fact that he's killing it right now, I mean, good for him, man, because he's got some talent that obviously Stanford could not utilize this year.
Yeah, and I asked Mike. I was like, "Hey, man, you watch McKee? You must have seen this guy at some point." He's like, he's kind of out of nowhere. So it's cool to see that. It's also, I mean, quarterback play. You kind of can get zoned in on the coverage, and
right.
But I mean, sometimes you see a receiver flash, and I guess that's
nothing. That's not a lot. So
that's nothing. Yeah,
exactly. I should say he's the number 3 receiver for Stanford. The tight end also had more yards than him. So technically he's the 4th leading receiver on the Cardinal, but still, man, I mean, this guy came out of absolute nowhere. I don't blame anyone for not knowing about him, honestly.
Well, I think he's got the kind of player that you know about when the scouts go to practices. You know what I mean? Because Jim Nagy, he always talks about anytime, he talks about assembling the rosters for the Senior Bowl and the invites. A huge part of that are the conversations that he has with the decision makers and the scouts for NFL teams. So, these are scouts that are watching practices, asking the coaches about guys. You know what I mean? It's it might be one of those players that we see do a lot more in the NFL than he did in college, which, I mean, it's cool. It doesn't happen very often, but it's cool when it does.
And I just want to throw out one thing. So I'm actually giving him I'm selling him a little short, because he was the 4th leading receiver. He also missed 6 games this year with I'm assuming an injury. So that probably played a pretty big part in it. And he probably would have been a bigger role in that offense. But he's missed, I think Mike even said on the show, he's missed a good portion of his career. So hopefully he's healthy now, and hopefully he can make some money, because he hasn't really done much. His career at Stanford has been marred by injuries a lot of times. So now hopefully he's healthy and can show off what he actually is capable of.
Yeah. I just want to throw a few more names out there that were interesting today, that just for different reasons. Carlton Martial, I love. I think he's great. He's going to be the next Sean Dion Hamilton. That guy's going to be an awesome coach. Another guy that JP Acosta and I had a long conversation about. It's just, the dude is so driven to just make every play, but he measured in at like 5'7", 205, I think, and he's trying to play Mike linebacker. I mean, I hope he might be a very good special teamer. Like, he looked good in special teams too, but it's just even standing next to the other linebackers, like, it's like, oh my God, dude, you're like a slot corner. Like, it's unbelievable. Like, that guy like deserves all of the like awards you could possibly give him just for getting to where he is. Like, he is an inspiration.
Yeah, and to go with him too, a little Nick, like he was a walk-on too. So it's not, it's kind of surprising that, he's a guy, and his career grade at PFF is a 95. So this guy is not like, he played okay. Like, no, he was a dominant linebacker for Troy. Yeah, obviously the size is a big issue and probably going to preclude him from playing in the NFL a lot, but he's an electric player in college. I'm happy he got a Senior Bowl invite, and it does not surprise me that this guy is showing the best hustle out there because he's a guy that had to work for everything he's got. He's a walk-on at Troy, became one of the best linebackers in college football. Now, once again, he's being doubted heading into the NFL, and he's probably saying, hey, I've done this before. I'm going to prove everyone wrong once again. So I love the shout-out to Carlton Martial because I can't get enough of that guy. I love watching Carlton Martial.
Yeah. Is he athletic enough to play safety in the NFL? Is that feasible for him?
He's going to run 4.6s at best, probably. Like maybe like a 4.58. Like that would be his best time. Like I just
4.58 is that you can play safety in the NFL at 4.
Yeah, I mean maybe. I don't think he's gonna. Maybe that's even a stretch. I don't. Here's the thing, like Kyle Hamilton.
I don't know that much about him,
but we talked about this a lot last year. Like his flying 20 was the same speed as Lewis Scenes. Like Kyle Hamilton's top speed is very high. If Carlton Martial runs a similar time to Kyle Hamilton, it'll be like a great 10 split, and then like not a whole lot of extra gear. So I don't know.
He's also not going to have the wingspan to make up for it.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a few things there. And he's 5'7". Like, I don't know. Like, I love him. I hope he has a long career as a special teamer and then coaches because he really is. But awesome. Keon White, kind of in the same thing as Carl Brooks, like a guy that just like I think athletically is different. Carries 280 so well. He's going to be an actual like edge DL hybrid type. And he was playing very well. And I think he just kind of went on the radar because a lot of people were expecting to be good. I think he is one of these guys that Mel Kiper puts him in the first round. Everyone's just kind of like, yeah, I don't know why no one's done that yet. Like he is very much a type of player who should be in that discussion. Just I think the Georgia Tech thing probably is kind of hurting him a little bit because, he's produced at times against some better competition in his career. And he's going to blow up the combine and just, you see that as well. He was a guy who played well in that first round against those tackles early on. Another guy who gave DeJuan Jones some run for his money at times, which was difficult to come by today. D. Winters for TCU. If there was a linebacker that stood out to me today, was him. Just looked comfortable doing everything, which is honestly like in the Senior Bowl, a lot of these linebacker drills are designed to make you extremely uncomfortable. So it's just it was good to see at least one look like he knew what he was doing. And then who was the last guy that I wanted to talk about?
Well, if you want to, real quick, Nick, I mean, the Keon White thing, man, I saw we were watching the NFL Network today, me and Anthony Tresh at PFF offices, and Daniel Jeremiah's big board popped up on it, and he had Keon White 8th overall. And I think I texted our old Boomer Bus chat. I was like, dude, DJ has him at 8. And I haven't watched too much of Keon White. Nick, obviously, you've seen a lot of him at the Senior Bowl today. He seems like an athletic guy. He's a transfer from Old Dominion. He played well at Old Dominion. Man. I mean, that was a guy that when I saw him at 8 overall, I was like, whoa, I have not even, really thought of this guy as even a first round potential. And now, one of the most respected draft analysts in the game, Daniel Jeremiah, who I really admire, has him in the top 10. He's a guy that I think could make a lot of money for himself, both in the Senior Bowl and in the Combine coming up too.
We just get like one Trayvon Walker, and now there's like 20 Trayvon Walkers, and it's just what is happening. Like it's cool. I did just find the other player. Okay, yes. So this is an early on thing. Donnie actually sent JL Skinner from Boise State safety his measurables, and I swear I was thinking this before I saw the text. I didn't know who it was because he was wearing this weird Boise State helmet and I had no idea who he was. But that guy on the field just looked different. Like he's like a basketball player out there. Like there wasn't a specific play to me that stood out and was like, oh, that guy looks like an awesome player. But just the size profile, he was the one dude who you just looked at all the players and you're like, that's a different build right there. And as a safety, like, I don't know, maybe I need to watch him a little more in depth tomorrow just to kind of get an idea of what we're dealing with here. But it's intriguing to see, a 6'4", 217 safety, kind of like Kyle Hamilton, but also has like an even like a 6'5" wingspan, like just similar, So that's a fun one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a guy, I mean, I don't know how much he impressed in practice. Nick, you probably could go into that. But I mean, he's a guy that impressed me whenever I watched him at Boise State this year. I mean, he had an 83.3 coverage grade, which is really good for a safety. And yeah, he's got that length, man, that you can't coach. And he's a guy that I really like. And I liked a lot at Boise State. I don't know how he actually performed at practice today, but I know when his measurable was posted on Twitter, that raised a lot of eyebrows. So Nick could probably go into what he actually saw from on the field. But I mean, he was a guy that I loved when I watched Boise State this year.
Yeah, I just like that he was moving around a lot. Like he's playing different positions in the box, deep, in the slot. Nothing in particular specifically with his play, but just like, if he can stick, he's going to be a valuable piece because it's just you don't see those type of players. And I'll give Kyron a float. He really liked how Jake Andrews, the Troy center, played today. I didn't really get a lot of looks at him, but I trust Kyron's judgment on that. So considering he's our offensive line guy. So there were, I honestly, like, I think, it got kind of quiet practice 2, the energy kind of died down a little bit. It was a quieter practice, but the overall level of play, I think today was pretty good. At least the trenches was like pretty high level. And this is one of these drafts where I was kind of worried about the depth of picks going to day 2. And I think just because of how good the trenches are starting to shape up, we're going to see more depth than we initially thought, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, well, for box defensive players or safeties in this kind of setting, it's hard to really stand out. You know what I mean? Because you can't close the way that you really want to. You know what I mean? Like you can't use your physicality in that way. So it's more just like about, knowing where you're supposed to be and understanding that quickly. I think that's the best you can do in like the first day of practice on a day like today. And, just speaking to the energy, I can't say for sure, but what I can say is it's a lot hotter here than any of us expected. I brought almost exclusively cold weather clothes. It's not flannel, but I honestly don't have cooler clothes than this. And I wish I did. So I'm not surprised that the pacing of practice or the intensity maybe slowed down a little bit, because you could feel it. Like when the first practice started around 11:30, we were all kind of looking up like, oh, this is not what I was in for today. But it was fun, man. It was a fun day. It was brief for me. I'm very much hoping that tomorrow is a longer day. I brought my kids out and my wife, and the idea was to do all of the practice stuff in the day and then go and do some fun stuff with them in the afternoon and evening. And now it's like, if I get there for a full set of practices, I think I'll be pretty lucky, to be honest.
I think you were at the right practice today, though. So that's good.
But all right, so we're not having the longest show today. The right practice. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I did catch a lot of stuff. I mean, the tone of the practice was set early. Bad quarterback play, good trench play right off the bat. Like that was something that you saw within the first couple of minutes. I will say that. But so we're not going to go too long today because we've all got some stuff to do to prepare for tomorrow. But we do have some coaching hires that have been made official today while we were at practice. At least some of us were. The Denver Broncos have finally made it official. They are signing Sean Payton to be their next head coach. They're sending a couple of picks to the Saints, getting one back. They're sending their first-round pick this year and their second-round pick next year and getting back a third-round pick next year. And Sean Payton is officially back in the NFL to coach up Russell Wilson. I feel like this makes a lot of sense for a myriad of reasons. I personally don't know how much it's going to impact Russell Wilson this year, but I'm also not sure how much that matters in the scheme of things. Nick, take it away. I mean, signs were pointing away from him, but I still kind of felt like that was the right fit. And now it gets done. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting. So I know that there's some buzz about this like recently, even though it was never a thing, but I kind of had known about this going even back to like the beginning of the year that Washington was interested in Sean Payton and maybe was thinking of making Ron Rivera a front office guy. But they were waiting for ownership change. And so they get the gun jumped here and Denver's going to get him instead. I don't know if I'm upset about that at all, actually. Like, I think that there's one team that really could have made this work. It's Denver. We had discussions in the past about the Cardinals. They're just not talented enough. I really like Kyler Murray. I think that's a great pairing with Sean Payton, but you can't trade picks away for a coach at the point that they're at right now, when I think you can go hire someone still pretty good out there. Like literally, like just throwing a name out there, like caution to the wind, like just like Joe Brady's out there. Like let's go wild and like just hire somebody like that to work with Kyler Murray and just figure it out and develop the roster. Like, I think they could be fine with that. Whereas I think the Saints legitimately need a presence like this with what happened last year and someone who's willing to work with Russell Wilson on the offensive side. And it's just, it's probably a bit of a premium they gave up here. And I maybe am not completely thrilled by it, but if it works, and if it works, it's going to work really well. If it doesn't, it's going to fall flat on their face. Like, that's one of these moves. And so ultimately, when you're in that situation, you don't really worry about what you're giving up.
Yeah, I actually really like this move. Listen, they're a team that I know a lot of people. I actually think that compensation was fine, even less than I would have even given up for him. But there are a lot of people who are saying, I can't believe they traded away that much. Man, the Denver Broncos are pot committed right now. They are pot committed to Russell Wilson. And everyone in that building knows if this does not work out with Russell Wilson, I am out of a job. So they need to make sure that they can save their butts right now and get a coach that can work with Russell Wilson. You couldn't, strike out again after such a disastrous hire, Nathaniel Hackett. You need a proven head coach. Sean Payton is that. My former colleague, Eric Eager, who now works at Sumner Sports, does an amazing job there. He actually went into how valuable a coach is, and he came out with the best coaches are worth about 2 first-round picks, and that is just purely on-field game management, clock management, fourth down, decision-making, timeout usage. That's just in-game stuff. Like, not even going into the game planning and the CEO type of relationship you need to have with the players and, getting the players, the locker room, and all that just on field, they're worth about a couple first-round picks. Like Nick Sirianni, according to his war chart, was worth about as much as a Justin Jefferson or any of the top non-quarterbacks this year. So I think coaches are extremely undervalued when you talk about how much they're actually worth. If you think Sean Payton's up there with the best of the best, yeah, you trade that. You absolutely trade a first and a second-round pick. I would have even said maybe 2 first-round picks would have been okay for me. But if they believe that, I don't know if I still do. I think he is a top 8 or so coach in the league. But if you think he's one of the best, you absolutely need to do it. And when you have Russell Wilson and you're pot committed like that, I completely understand why everyone in that organization, is going all out right now, because you just can't afford to miss again. Because if you miss again, you're done. You're done. You're getting fired from Denver. So I understand why everyone in that building made this move.
Well, I think there are a lot of factors that go into it. First of all, I agree with you. I think Sean Payton is a tremendous head coach. I think what he does, calling plays and managing the game, and schematically, he's among the best that there are. So to get him on board, I kind of have the feeling that most of the people who say that it's giving up too much are people who are in some way talking themselves out of being disappointed that he's not becoming their head coach. Like that is honestly how I feel. And like I like Robert Saleh, I really do. You guys know I'm a Jets fan. But to be perfectly honest, if this trade package was available for Sean Payton to come to the Jets, if it wasn't an unmitigated disaster for that to actually occur and sloppy, if it was at all realistic, I would be a proponent of it, but I just know that's never going to happen. It was never going to happen based on the way that things have gone and just the timing. But especially because you look at a first and a second and you get back a third, that's not that bad. I mean, once you get out of the once you get out of the top 40, this is my personal opinion, and I don't have like specific data to back this up, but once you get out of the top 40, the difference between a second and a third is not that much to me. And the fact that you're still getting a shot, you're still getting the dart throw, that means a lot. So to give up a first and then swap a second for a third, that's not a big deal to me personally. I think it's worthwhile. And from the Denver perspective, there is a chance that even if Russell Wilson tanks, that you can hold up Sean Payton as a win, right? So even if Sean Payton comes in and Russell Wilson can't be salvaged, if Sean Payton still ends the season with the cachet that he has right now, then as long as you have his support, you could probably justify coming back despite the disaster of the Russell Wilson move. So there's that. And I think also, what other coach signs up for that? What other coach signs up with the basically knowledge that, like, no matter how bad Russell Wilson is, that I will be back next year because, even if we end up with the first overall pick, like, no one's going to think it's my fault that Russell Wilson stinks.
It's so funny because it seemed like nobody wanted this job at all. Like, I know they talked to
issues, but if you can hear me, Max, you're about to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, they interviewed Jim Harbaugh. He said, no, I'm sticking with Michigan. Then, you start going around. You say, okay, Dan.
Let's see if we can get it back.
Can you hear me now? Nick, can you hear me?
We there? Yes, sir.
You guys got me? All right, I don't know what's going on right now.
Yeah.
But
if you can hear me, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I was just saying, like, I think.
I can hear you guys.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was making sure.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, I was just saying, man, it's kind of incredible because it felt like nobody wanted this Denver job. Dan Quinn said, no, I'm sticking in Dallas. Presumably
smart.
Maybe take over from Mike McCarthy after he gets fired in the next year or two. Jim Harbaugh, they went to, and he's like, nope, no thanks. I'm sticking to Michigan. Then they go to DeMeco Ryans. He says, no, I want to take the Texans job, which is amazing to even hear that.
Is that confirmed?
That's what Rappaport said.
We know what happened.
We had a source off between him and Schefter, so I tend to
which is wild.
Yeah, I like Rappaport a little more. I think Schefter gets up to some shady stuff.
Yeah, true.
So
true.
I tended to I'll side with Ian just for the story of it, man. Like, they go to DeMeco, he says no. Then they go okay. They start putting together this trade for Sean Payton. They go, let's go try to get DeMeco one more time. They go to DeMeco again, and he goes, no, I'm not doing it. Then they go, okay, we have to trade for Sean Payton. It's kind of amazing that Sean Payton was like their fourth choice in this. And then, a lot of that probably has to do with having to give up a first and a second round pick. But at the same time, like, I think it's just pretty funny that nobody wanted this Denver job. And yet they still end up with the best coaching candidate out of anyone right now, which is Sean Payton. And yeah, they paid a premium to get him, but I think it's worth it. And I think it's a terrific hire for them.
There's one thing that I just want to throw out there, and this is the downside of Sean Payton. When you have someone with that kind of influence over the entire organization who is not front office, so to speak, sometimes you do saintsy things and you leverage your entire future for a pass rusher who's only becomes pretty decent in like his fourth year. You know what I mean? So yeah. That is the one downside. And when you bring in Sean Payton with a low leverage situation as a GM, you're setting yourself up for some potential power struggles there, and you might ultimately have to bite the bullet and make a few trade ups or some veteran trades that you wouldn't do if it was up to you. So there is a downside. I can't ignore that, but I do ultimately think it is the best possible outcome for any Broncos fan. I mean, maybe they don't all agree with that, but if I was one, I think I would be ecstatic. Now, I don't know how well this season's going to go because I don't love Russell Wilson at this point. I'm on record with that, but under the circumstances, I think it's pretty good. Nick, let's let you rebut because you were probably the most bearish on this hire.
I mean, I think it's a tough situation to get a good hire. We ranked our coaching jobs on this podcast last week, and I had Denver as the only one better than, or the only one that was worse was Houston, in my opinion. It's such a small niche that you have to fit to make this work. And if it works, like, okay, there's a lot of upside here, but I just like Sean Payton, Dan Quinn, and then anybody else is just like, you're hoping that it somehow clicks culturally with everything that's going on. It's already, quite frankly, just been a disaster. Like Nathaniel Hackett gets memed out of oblivion, but they had a really good defensive coordinator last year, like a guy who's getting real NFL head coaching interviews despite being quite young. And that didn't really matter to the overall locker room dynamic, like they just, you got to fix it, and I think you have to have somebody who can manage the rest of the players with Wilson at the same time. And there's probably only two people who could do that, which are the two that we were just talking about. And they got one of them. And you know what? That's all you can do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think a big part of that Broncos season was one, they had a lot of injuries too, which I think they'll be a lot healthier next year. I don't think they're as bad as a 5-12 team as they went this year. So I think they will improve. The second thing is, Nick, you nailed it on the head. The Russell Wilson dynamic in that locker room, I think, killed this team. I think it killed it. I think there's so many players on the Broncos that thought this guy was just a joke and a corny guy. And a lot of players were tweeting out stuff, being like very cryptic tweets about Russell Wilson. And yeah, I mean, I think you need to fix the locker room. Yeah, you need to fix the locker room ASAP. And I think Sean Payton is that guy. And listen, I think that outside of quarterback, the most important man in an organization is the coach. And I think that the Broncos nailed it at coach. We'll yet to see the quarterback, but we'll see. I think it's a great hire, and I think it's the right one because, like I said, you're pot committed with Russell Wilson. No matter how you feel about him now, you're pot committed. You got to ride it out with him now, and I think Sean Payton's the right guy to try to fix this disaster.
Yeah, and Nick, I think our initial conversation was not on air, but when we talked about what was the problem in Denver, this was early. I want to say it was maybe like week 2 or week 3. So, signs were not good, but it wasn't really clear exactly how bad Russell Wilson was going to be that year. And I said, I think he's done. I think he's cooked. I don't think he's got it anymore. And I think that his personality is so heavily formulated that, and it's become more so over time. There's probably a little bit more. I don't want to say honesty because it implies that he's not honest now. But it's like I think it was just more genuine initially when he was younger, and so the team kind of just understood who he was. And as he became more and more, it became annoying. When you're just like, when you just get full Russell Wilson and you've never been around that guy or had that guy before, it's like it's a lot and probably gets very old very, very quickly, especially if the play is not there. So I mean, I've always
they soured as the year went on. Like I think early in the year, obviously defense is playing well. They created some big plays. They couldn't score in the red zone. Like that was their big thing, is they just could not score touchdowns, which is like a very specific and unfortunate thing that can kill offenses even if they're being efficient. And like they played a close game against Seattle, and in a lot of ways, like we're kind of unfortunate to lose that game and made some poor game management decisions to knock that home. They beat the 49ers at home. Like people forget this. Like that happened. It sounds so weird right now to say that, but they were able to.
But that was
defeat
with
that
Trey
football
Lance,
team.
though. Wasn't it?
That was with Jimmy Garoppolo. But it was Garoppolo's first start. The Niners probably were not as good then as they ended up being, but still, this team is basically what Max said. Like, they're not a 5-12 football team. They're probably closer to a 7-10 football team, but it's just, can you make the changes necessary to make them a 10-7 football team? And I think the talent here clearly exists. It's just like, I saw somebody earlier on Twitter talking about, like, is this like roster good enough that if you get elite Russell Wilson, they can win a Super Bowl? And like, yes, it is.
Yeah.
Like, it is, but it's just, I don't think the expectation is going to be elite Russell Wilson, even if it works. I think if it works, you're hoping for like, just an above average Russell Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was really brutal for Russell Wilson to have to go up against the Seahawks in week 1, because if you walk away with a loss, which he did, it's tough. I mean, you got to be really thick-skinned to just shrug that off. And I feel like that was probably the beginning of a spiral too, because, if your whole shtick is like, we would have been better if I could have played the way that I wanted to play. And then the whole narrative is you go to a team that has Super Bowl expectations and you leave a team that is now basically, some people were choosing to have the first overall pick, even if it's week 1 and, offenses aren't fully formulated yet. That's still a really tough look. And I think anybody that says that, they could have handled that is probably selling the situation a little short. It's a little bit, it's embarrassing on national TV. I mean, it's tough, but we'll see. I mean, maybe he can come back in a brand new mentality, and Sean Payton will actually give him confidence. Who's to say? Regardless, I think that the move itself to hire Payton was the right one. And when we did our rankings, I had this job significantly higher than you. And I think I even said it on the show that I really couldn't separate the idea that Sean Payton wasn't the right guy for that. You know what I mean? I can't remember how I phrased it, but the reason I had it so high had a lot to do with the fact that I expected him to be like the perfect guy for the role. But all right, guys, anything else on Sean Payton to Denver before we touch on the Texans? All right. So the Houston Texans finally hired a guy that we expect to be around for more than 1 year. At least I would imagine.
God, I hope. Yeah, that would be a disaster.
That would be pretty bad if not. So
if here's a hot take. Yeah. If DeMeco Ryans lasts only a year, do the Texans end up in San Antonio?
This is all to get Josh McCown. They just want to keep building up their credibility before they eventually hire Josh McCown. I'm convinced of it.
Or Mexico City, somewhere,
Yeah.
This was the best case scenario for them.
Oh my God, yeah.
There would have been a revolt. All right, so my first question is this: as giant mosquitoes are swarming me, what does this mean for the quarterback situation? Okay, because you bring in DeMeco Ryans, he's a defensive coordinator, still pretty young. He was with the Texans for a while as a player, one of their best players for a long stretch. He's beloved in the community. He's a hotshot coordinator right now. This is about the pinnacle of probably when you could get him, because, there's always regression to the mean at some point. So this is like the guy to get if you want a young up-and-comer right now, aside from maybe like a guy like Ben Johnson or something. But the Texans get him. What does this mean? What do you think that this sets in motion for quarterback? Because I think, we generally expect him to go draft, but what do you think he would want in a quarterback in this draft?
I think you're less likely to see Will Levis on this team now, because I think that requires a dedicated offensive coach that wants to develop a quarterback. So Stroud or Bryce Young, I think one of those guys are Texans. I think you could make an argument that because of the Niners connection, maybe they think about a Garoppolo as a bridge guy. Maybe they bring him in if they can get an affordable deal. But it's similar along the lines of what we thought earlier with them. I could see D'Amico being a guy that like wants to trade up to 1 to get, with his pick of a quarterback. And I think it's going to be for him, it's going to be who he wants to work with, because in terms of like personality, just because of, I think the type of coach he is. And I think that their chances of getting Bryce Young have increased because of this hire, which is great for Texans fans. Like if you have Bryce Young and D'Amico Ryans going for the next 5 years, like I feel excellent about that. Like as on any team.
I agree. I think that's a great point, Nick. I actually didn't even think about the Will Levis thing. I think that is completely out of the window now. Like Nick said, you need a dedicated offensive guy. There were some people that said today that the Texans might go defense number 2 overall. Now they have to make that's not how it works. That's just not how this works. I think a lot of people put too much stock into the whole, he's an offensive minded coach who's going to want to build you. Like, no, dude, like when you're a head coach, you're a CEO. You're a CEO of a franchise now. D'Amico Ryans,
it shouldn't be. Let's say it shouldn't be the way that it goes, because I don't know if it all. I don't know.
It is true. There's some guys who are so dedicated to their side of the ball that they sometimes forget about the other side a little bit too much. D'Amico, I don't think is one of those guys. I think he's going to hire a brilliant offensive coach. Maybe Michael Furr. Maybe he gets him in a little bit. He's got that San Francisco connection. Maybe he gets him another shot to the Jets disaster, but. Which honestly wasn't a lot of LaFleur's fault. I think a lot of that was due to other circumstances, but I love this hire. This was one that I was like, I could not believe. And listen, he played for the Texans. He's actually one of 3 coaches now in the NFL who've played for the team that they now coach. Dan Campbell and Frank Reich being the other 2 now who play for the Panthers. So that's probably why he wanted to go to Houston. This is my number 2 candidate behind Sean Payton. This guy, not only is he a brilliant defensive mind, the 49ers were 2nd in EPA per play allowed this year behind the Patriots, who, by the way, Bill Belichick, probably the greatest defensive mind in football history. So they were number 2. Not only that, 49ers players would die for that man. They would die for him. 49ers love that guy. I think he's one of the best leaders of men that we have in the NFL right now. And the Texans, quite frankly, need that. This is a disaster of an organization that you can't really believe in the leadership because of a lot of stuff that went on in that organization. This was a terrific culture building hire. This is a terrific schematic hire. This is a guy that I wanted as my head coach. And for the Texans, who you guys mentioned before, might have been the worst job on the market, this was a grand slam hire. I was over the moon for this, and I think D'Amico Ryans, you get Bryce Young. Texans fans should be buying all the stock in Houston right now because I think this is the best hire of the offseason so far, I would say. Along with the Sean Payton one, I put a close second. But D'Amico Ryans, I love this hire. I love this hire for Houston.
Rarely am I looking at all these offseason hires being like, yeah, that's good, coach. It's good. That works. That one works. I haven't disliked the hire yet. This is my favorite one. It's just, D'Amico was my top candidate this offseason. It happens to be that like almost every offseason for me, it's just whatever Niners coordinator is better. I don't know, man. It just seems to work. Kyle Shanahan's a smart guy. And always seems to have good personalities under him because he's not maybe the most personable. So he kind of needs a foil and just continuously produces these foils that are excellent head coaches. But D'Amico the Texans needed a guy who you could believe would be around, be a program builder, quite frankly. And, this guy just has got the roots in the organization. He played for them. The pedigree's there. He succeeded. He's the type of positive force that just gets your fans back into it, gets the players back into it, and just makes it hard for, quite frankly, everything else in the organization to continue to be maybe still a little bit dysfunctional, but just not quite the same because you've got, quite frankly, a stud head coach. Like this guy is, I feel I have a hard time seeing him. If this doesn't work out, it's not going to be his fault. It's going to be the lack of talent or something like that, which I think, quite frankly, they have enough young players that with Bryce Young, this team, I think, could be surprisingly good next year. But that's just my take.
I want to throw something out there real quick. So, and I was just thinking about this because of what you mentioned about Kyle Shanahan, and we've talked about a little bit before about how great of a job he does assembling a staff, guys that grow and become head coaches elsewhere. Is there something that is perhaps a little bit understated and a little bit underrecognized in the idea of having, especially on opposing sides of the ball, two coaches with very differing personalities? Because if you look at these guys who have grown under Kyle Shanahan, gone elsewhere, a lot of them are very energetic, high emotional intelligence personality styles. I mean, you look at Robert Saleh, you look at D'Amico Ryans, you look at Mike McDaniel, and you look at Sean McVay, and then you look at when some of those other guys were at their best. Let's say Sean McVay, for example. I think, even though they did win the Super Bowl with Raheem Morris, were they not probably a little bit better when they had Staley overall as that kind of like opposing personality? And that's one of the reasons I really like the Fangio hire, if in fact is 100% happening in Miami, because Mike McDaniels, he is the McVay, like he is the Saleh, like he is the bubbly personality, high energy, and then you bring in a guy like Fangio, who's kind of like the stone-faced, old-fashioned coach. There's a balance there.
Yeah.
And so would we like to see that perhaps a little bit more? So if we look at D'Amico Ryans and we're looking at who he brings in offensively, is there credence to that? Am I grasping at straws, or is that something?
I think it makes it easier for the coaches. I don't actually think it matters that much for the players per se. Ultimately, we're heading towards an era in sports in general, and this is getting all very philosophical, but I think like what the Chiefs do well is that they get the players involved in game plans, and they're trying to foster growth in terms of the knowledge of the player base, right? Whereas prior to this, like there was, once upon a time, Mike Ditka said coaches coach, players play. And there are a lot of coaches still at youth levels who like don't want their players getting involved with teaching because they don't want them to think about that part. But in reality, like it's an important, so that's ultimately like, I don't care if you're a guy, if you're a tough guy, if you're a nice guy who jokes around, like that's what I want from my coaches. And I think you see a lot of teams doing that model that you're talking about, Max. And it maybe helps them from a structural standpoint of like having a disciplined football team. But ultimately, like, I don't think Kansas City really has. Maybe Spags is more disciplinarian type than I give him credit for. But just like there are more important things. And I think it does maybe help a little bit. But I think ultimately, like, we need teachers in the game. That's what makes a good coaching staff.
Yeah, I kind of fall in the middle there. I think it's actually an interesting point that you brought up, Max, because I think, it is, I've been in locker rooms before, obviously not at the level that they are playing at right now, but I've been in locker rooms where you have, one coach who's like firing you up, and then another coach who's like all schematic and is like, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. So I think it makes sense to have two differing personalities, because if you have, a coach that won't fire you up on your sideline, then it's kind of like you're just doing your job. You're so robotic, where I think it's a little bit good to have some emotion, but also you don't want to have too many emotional coaches, because then all of a sudden you're playing too aggressively sometimes too, and you're not really focusing on the X's and O's. I don't think this is as big of a deal like Nick said, but I think it is an interesting point of like, you kind of want, as much as you want the best brilliant minds in there, I think personality definitely plays a part in a lot of locker rooms as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think that when you're a player, it might not be as simple as, if you're a person who, generally speaking, you respond better to constructive criticism, right? Or you respond better to positive reinforcement, then if you don't have like and I'm not just talking about a position coach necessarily, but like a high standing member of the organization who brings that, then I think that there's probably missing motivation there. and then vice versa. Some players or some people, they need that stern leadership to really get the most out of them, right? Because they might enjoy the positive reinforcement, but they don't, you know what I mean? They roll with it as opposed to like using it as continued motivation. So I think that it's has to do with both player, like both types of player, both types of person. But then also I think that there is just an evening nature, a balancing nature to having those two types of people. So like even outside of just the individual player perspective, just like the tone of the team carries more of a balance, I think. And that's like, that's it, I'm not pulling from data here, certainly for that, but just, the feeling of years of watching NFL games, like there are games when players like they don't. It seems like they don't know how to respond to a situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think it's a really interesting point that you brought up, especially with the 49ers, because you look at Kyle Shanahan, he's not the rah-rah coach at all. Like, he is stoic almost at all times at the sideline. He's a very schematically brilliant guy. And then you mentioned, like, Robert Saleh, rah-rah coach, obviously still brilliant. Sean McVay, again, brilliant, but rah-rah guy. And then you look at D'Amico Ryans, brilliant, but rah-rah guy. And it's like, I think that's Kyle Shanahan probably thinks about that. And he says, yeah, let's get the best minds in here. That's why all of them, Mike LaFleur as well, not Mike, I'm sorry, Michael Daniel, who also is like a rah-rah guy, but brilliant. Like, they obviously, I think it matters. And I think that Kyle Shanahan, probably his next coordinators, will probably be, obviously great minds, but also leader of men as well. And I think it says a lot where all these guys are head coaches now. They all kind of share that same personality trait, like you said.
I just think you should look for the opposite of you, and so it just really intrigues me that Vic Fangio is going to Miami potentially, because I think he is that balancing factor, and I worry a little bit that potentially the Jets hired Hackett because he's not that balancing factor. And even though I'm not as down on him from like the Denver perspective, because I think that was to some degree a snowball effect and whatever other factors. I do just wonder a little bit about, he is a more upbeat guy. Like, he is kind of a fun-loving guy too. So like, if you got Saleh and you got him, then is Jeff Ulbrich enough of that kind of guy that he's bringing that balancing factor? I don't know. And so I'm looking at it from a Jets perspective a little bit, but for some of these other ones too, I mean, I don't know. I'd have to really sit down and think about it, because it's just something that occurred to me as I was kind of rolling through each of those 49ers assistants that moved on to different roles. And it just struck me that there was a similarity that seemed to be balancing for Shanahan in particular. But I have to really think about it to like plant my flag on it. But all right, guys. I think that's going to do it for us today. We hit a full hour. We're going to get ready for the Senior Bowl tomorrow. Last question I want to ask, Nick, is there anybody in particular that you want to get a better look at, or that you really want to see if they have the same kind of performance? Anything that you just want to come back tomorrow night and say, this is what I wanted to see, or I'm lacking what I wanted to see from this particular player?
I need to look at JL Skinner more. I that's like an actual thing, is I need to watch him play and just kind of see what it's looking like. But one guy that Marcus Whitman said looked decent, and I was actually a fan of this guy in college, is Puka Nacua, who was used as kind of like this strange hybrid weapon receiver type for BYU. And apparently did some good things this week or yesterday, or today actually. What am I talking about? He's a fun one. I don't know where he looks athletically to line up. I don't know what he is in terms of that. I think his size profile is good enough to play receiver in the NFL, obviously 6'1", 206, but I need to watch him kind of as an NFL receiver in training, like what he is, to really kind of see it and understand it.
He was the third highest graded receiver this year, according to PFF. He was phenomenal for the Cougars. Battled some injuries for sure, which is why his numbers weren't as amazing, but he was efficient, man. He was one of the best in terms of yards per route run this year. So yeah, Puka Nacua, I heard a lot of good things about him today. which is not surprising because if you watch him, he was a superstar for BYU this year.
They used him like Debo.
Yeah. I love Puka Nacua. I think that's a great shout. I think he's a terrific player.
All right. So among others, that's who we'll keep an eye on tomorrow. Nick, appreciate you. We might do this again tomorrow, so I'll hold off on all of the pleasantries because we're probably going to try and pump out a little bit more content than usual just because of the situation. But Max, let everybody know where they can find you and all of your work.
Yeah, of course. Follow me at @Max with Twitter and TikTok, and then also at pff.com. I've got this week is positional rankings, which have been going swimmingly for me so far. A lot of people very happy with my top 10 positional rankings heading into next season. I dropped quarterbacks already. Top 10 running backs came out as well. Top 10 receivers coming out tomorrow. So yeah, if you want to yell at me and say why your favorite school's player should be in my top 10, follow me at @Maxwick and read the articles at pff.com because I got every single position top 10 returning to college football next year coming out this week and next week. So a lot of fun.
All right. Very cool. Check us out at Defiant Takes on all social media platforms. Defiant Takes Football on YouTube and podcasts. And it's going to do it. I'm going to sleep like a rock, God willing. My kids sleep like rocks. I will be out. I closed my finger at a car door today. Like that's just my spatial awareness is just not. It's just not there. Like I'm on so little sleep. So thank you all for bearing with me. Nick, I apologize for your knees.
I've been kneeling this whole time, and I have had surgery on said knee. So yes,
I did not know that. I mean, I knew about the surgery. I didn't know you're kneeling. I apologize. All right. Let's do this again tomorrow, hopefully with more sleep, more preparation, and less sunburn. All right.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's still going to be here tomorrow, probably. So.
All right. See you guys later.
See ya.
Yeah.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.